What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to cover the Combat Aviation Brigade. A lot of you guys have requested me to do a video on the different type of aviation units there are out there. The main one you're going to find yourself in whenever you leave flight school and go on to the conventional Army is the Combat Aviation Brigade, also known as the CAB, C-A-B. As you guys have probably realized that the Army loves its acronyms. So anytime you hear me use the word CAB, I'm referring to the Combat Aviation Brigade. Like I said, 90% of the time you are going to find yourself in a Combat Aviation Brigade when you finish flight school. There are some situations where you might find yourself in what's called a TDA unit, and maybe we'll cover those in a separate video. But like I said, 90% of the time you're going to find yourself in a Combat Aviation Brigade if you fly 64s, 47s, or 60, which most of you guys will fly. So let's get right into it. So what is the Combat Aviation Brigade? So in order to understand exactly what a Combat Aviation Brigade is, you have to understand how the Army organizes things. And really it all comes down to the division, right? Whenever I was getting my Army career started, I was an infantryman. I enlisted at 19 years old in the infantry. And whenever I was at basic training, my drill sergeant used to always say, hey, there's two MOSs in the Army. There's the infantry and there's the infantry support. And the longer I've been in, that's made more and more sense to me. And really what he means by that is the Army really does support the infantry or the maneuver units. Now, there's different type of flavors of maneuver, right? You have the infantry, you have armor, you have strikers, mechanized infantry, light infantry. So when you hear the term maneuver, picture those forces. And everything else really exists to support the maneuver force. Aviation is one of those support elements that support the maneuver force. So everything is built around the Infantry Division. So what is an Infantry Division? I'll take a minute to put the breakdown of an example of an Infantry Division on the screen right now. All right, so if you look at that picture, you can see there's several brigades within an Infantry Division. So in an infantry division, typically you have two maneuver brigades. Whether that's light infantry, armor, or strikers is typically what you're going to see, but there's two brigades of maneuver. After that, you have your division artillery, also known as DIVARTY. That's treated as a brigade element. After that, you have the Combat Aviation Brigade, which is what you will find yourself in, and then you have the Sustainment Brigade, which is basically the logistical support element for that division. So now that you guys kind of understand that and have your heads wrapped around that, we can break down the Combat Aviation Brigade. And keep in mind that this brigade, this Combat Aviation Brigade's purpose is to give aviation support to that division, which centers around those two maneuver brigades. So, the CAB. Now, the CAB is comprised of 6 battalions, and keep in mind with this video, I'm going to simplify this video. This is not an ILE crash course. This isn't a CGSC crash course. This is a very simplified version that the person with no experience in the Army can kind of grasp this and get an idea in their head of, okay, I'm going to go to flight school and this is what I'm going to go into. So that's the whole purpose of this video. So within the CAB, you have 2 attack battalions, which is your 64s. You have 1 air assault battalion, which is 60s. And then you have 1 general support aviation battalion, or your GSAB. You have an aviation support battalion, also known as an ASB. And then you have a UAS system company, a unmanned aerial system company, which has your drones in it. So this video will really cover battalions that are focused on 64s, 60s, and 47s, just because many people in my audience that view my videos are going to be flying those platforms, and I know that that is the main thing you guys want to know about. So that's what we're going to focus on here. So let's cover the attack battalions first. You have 2 attack battalions. Now, these 2 attack battalions are very similar, but one of them is different. One of them will be known as the Attack and Reconnaissance Battalion. Like I said, the equipment and the mission set is quite similar, but that Attack and Reconnaissance Battalion is going to have I think it's Gray Eagles, and that makes them the Attack and Reconnaissance Battalion. But if you're a 64 driver, you're going to find yourself in one of those 2 battalions within the CAB. So each of them have 24 64s in each of the battalions, and one of them has the 12 RQ-7s. And then the mission set of these guys, and I know there's going to be a 64 pilot probably watching this, and I may botch this whole entire thing, this whole entire rundown on the attack battalion, just because everybody knows who watch my channel. I am a 60 driver. I am a Medevac guy. So my overview on this is going to be from my experience working with the attack. I by no means have studied attack doctrine or anything. Like I said, this is bottom line up front information. But from my experience working with these guys really focus on 3 missions. One is the deliberate attack. So the deliberate attack is when the higher headquarters identifies key terrain or an objective, whether that be a warehouse or an enemy safe house or an enemy stronghold, something of that nature, and the higher headquarters says, hey, we want to seize that objective and we need a lot of firepower on it. So the Aviation Task Force will give that to the 64 guys. They will come up with a very detailed a deliberate attack plan to figure out how they're going to get their 64s to that objective, rain rockets and lead onto that objective, kill and destroy as many people as possible, and get out of there so the maneuver force can occupy it. That is a basic bottom line up front of what an attack is. You then have your recon. So your recon can be when the higher headquarters wants to collect information on something, whether that be an objective, whether that be key terrain. Say there is a mountain in the middle of a battlefield that the division commander or the brigade commander says, hey, that's very important, but it's too risky to put people on it. We need more information. You could typically use your 64s or even those RQ-7s to go out there, recon it, collect information to see if enemy occupies it, if it's suitable to even go up it, things of that nature to kind of inform planning. Like I said, this could be key terrain, this could be an objective, it could even be a route. Say there's like a main highway that we want to put infantry guys up and use that as like a main MSR to go somewhere. A smart thing to do would be to use your aviation assets to recon that route and see if the enemy occupies it. Maybe it's not a good idea to use. Maybe we have to use a different MSR. Your route recon is going to help out with that, and you can use your aviation assets for that. So that is another mission that kind of falls into the attack community. And the third and final one that I've seen them do a lot is screens. So a screen, in the Army we have phase lines. So, and if you've watched a lot of military movies, you're probably familiar with phase lines. So in a battlefield, you might have phase line Annie, phase line Betty, phase line Camille, you know, so on and so forth. And these phase lines mean something, and it's a very easy way for higher headquarters to put that phase line into an order, and everybody's kind of on the same page of what they're talking about. So these screens oftentimes will get set up on a phase line, and the 64 guys will go out there and kind of buzz around on that phase line. They're not really actively trying to attack anybody. They're not really looking for a fight, but if somebody comes in that area they're doing a screen on, they will attack and kill them if they need to. It's kind of like, I guess a simplified way to look at this, it's kind of like a gang hanging out in their territory on their block. They're not necessarily looking for a fight on that block, but if a outside gang comes and tries to occupy that block, they will fight them. So that's kind of a simplified way to look at a screen, kind of. And then, like I said again, guys, I am not a 64 driver, but I have worked with 64s, and those three things are some of the things that I've seen them do. So I hope that gives the future 64 guys or people aspiring to be a 64 driver a kind of an idea of what you could be working with if you wind up in an attack or an attack and reconnaissance battalion. So the next unit we're going to cover is the Air Assault Battalion. So the Air Assault Battalion has 30 UH-60s, and their main missions are air assault, air movement, and CASEVAC. They do other things, of course, but those are the three main ones that you're going to see if you find yourself in an Air Assault Battalion. And as a disclaimer on this one, I'm a Medevac guy. I'm not a Air Assault guy, but working with these folks, this is kind of what I see them do. So Air Assault is obviously their bread and butter. That's why they're called the Air Assault Battalion. So what an Air Assault is basically higher headquarters says, hey, that looks like good terrain that we want to occupy, or that's an enemy stronghold that we need to go into and get the enemy off of that objective. They're going to, if they think that aviation assets is the way to go to occupy that piece of terrain or that objective, they're going to kick it over to the Aviation Task Force, and your air assault planners are going to get to planning on that to figure out the best way, the best route, the best formation. There's a whole lot of things that go into air assault planning, but they're going to figure out how they get boots on the ground and equipment on the ground the fastest and safest way possible on that objective and meet the commander's intent for that mission. So, now this is, if you guys have ever seen the movie Zero Dark 30, it covers the Bin Laden raid or Black Hawk Down. All of those things are examples of air assaults. Basically the movement of troops and equipment to occupy a piece of key terrain or an objective. The next is the air movement. So air movement is not necessarily taking troops to occupy a piece of key terrain or an objective. Oftentimes it's moving troops and equipment to places we might already hold as the friendly force. It's basically just being the transportation vehicle for moving equipment and troops. So the difference between those two is the key terrain and objective piece. And then you have CASEVAC. So what's CASEVAC? What's Medevac, right? Like, I'm a Medevac pilot, but the Air Assault Battalion does CASEVAC. So CASEVAC is not necessarily, it's the use of a vehicle that's not necessarily medical, but it's being used for medical purposes. So if there is a 60 in the area and there is a wounded soldier, for example, and that wounded soldier needs to be medevac to a higher role of care, they can use that non-medevac Black Hawk to transport that wounded person to a higher role of care. Now, the main difference is, one, it's not a dedicated medevac platform, and that wounded individual is not going to receive care en route on the way to that higher role of care. They're just really going to be thrown onto that bird, and they're just going to be transported. To where medevac, it is dedicated 24/7. That's all that aircraft is used for, is medevac, and the crew is trained for medevac purpose. And the big difference is they have that flight paramedic on board that's going to give en route critical care to the next higher role of care. So those are the big differences between CASEVAC and medevac. So the Air Assault would do CASEVAC. So those are the three things that you could find yourself doing if you find yourself in a Air Assault battalion. So the next unit we're going to cover is the General Support Aviation Battalion. This is where I fall into. So in the General Support Aviation Battalion, GSAB for short, so if you hear me say the term GSAB, I'm referring to this particular battalion. The GSAB has 8 UH-60s for VIP transport, and it has 12 CH-47s for really air assault, and then it has 15 HH-60s for medevac. There's other non-flight units within the GSAB, but those are your 3 flight units. So think of the GSAB as the Swiss Army knife of the cab. It's kind of the jack of all trades. It's got a couple of different missions rolled up under it. So first you have your Alpha Company. Your Alpha Company is VIP transport. And these guys are really moving generals and colonels around the battlefield to do battlefield circulation to maybe a subordinate unit of that commander to visit. They might take commanders to meetings that are far away from where their location is. And they can even do command and control above a battlefield that is live and happening, and that general or that colonel can make decisions while in that aircraft flying above the battle. So those are really kind of the 3 things that you're going to find yourself doing in a VIP company. Next, you have your Bravo Company, where your 47s are going to be located. They have 12 47s, and oftentimes these guys will get detached from the GSAB and rolled up under the Air Assault Company that is supporting an aviation task force. Now, everything that I said for the Air Assault is the same thing for the 47. So you have your Air Assault, your air movements, and your CASEVACs. They just are much, much bigger airframes, and they have a hell of a lot more power, so they can move and do a lot more, and they're much bigger. And then your Charlie Company. Your Charlie Company is your medevac company. Now, the medevac company is comprised of 5 platoons. You have your 4 FSMPs, your forward support medevac platoons, and then you have your ASMP, or your area support medevac platoon. These platoons can detach from the company, from the GSAB, and they can give support directly to a maneuver brigade. So they can operate autonomously from that company that they really belong to. They really never deploy as an entire medevac company. You kind of just hand them off to these maneuver brigades. So the main thing that the 4 FSMPs do is they're focused on supporting that brigade and moving wounded soldiers or casualties from Role 1 to Role 2. They're more up front than the ASMP is, to where the ASMP kind of hangs back in the division support area, and they're more concerned with patient transport from the Role 2 to the Role 3. After that casualty's kind of been sustained at the Role 2 and they move them back for higher like surgical care at the Role 3, and they can even be transported out to, you know, outside of the theater for higher role of care at a Role 4. And that's basically an overview of the entire cab. So you also, from a flight standpoint, so you also do have the Aviation Support Battalion, the ASB, and those guys support high-level maintenance and just logistical support for the cab overall. And you also have a Fox company that does that manages the unmanned aerial systems. But like I said in the beginning of the video, I recognize that most of my viewers are focused on the flight battalions mainly. If you guys want me to do a more in-depth overview of other battalions, or I'm sorry, the ASB and the UAS company, I can do that, but I know that you guys are mainly focused on the flight battalions. But yeah, that covers it, and I hope this gives you a better understanding of where you can find yourself after flight school. Again, very bottom line upfront information, but I hope this kind of gives you guys an idea. One thing I wanted to talk about is 71% of you guys are unsubscribed. So if you're not subscribed and you're still watching my channel and you find my content interesting, please subscribe. It helps me out. It's free. For all of you guys that are subscribed, thank you so much for the support. Keep the comments coming. I would like to hear what you guys want to fly, and what of those units that I just mentioned, what units you guys want to go into after flight school. I'd love to hear it. I love hearing the feedback on my videos. It makes making content a lot more interesting. And also feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns about anything. Again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys on the next video.